In prison, you never see the stars. When's the last time you walked outside and seen the stars and really paid attention to them? But you do once they're gone. I mean, freedom is one thing that you can't ever put a price tag on.
There's an epidemic in America's criminal justice system. The prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to the American Justice Podcast. Your hosts, Scott Pogensey and C. Derick Miller, come together to bring you the inside scoop on all of the wrongful conviction stories, both new and old. It's not only about the innocent who have been in prison, but also the victims of crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here are your hosts, Scott Pogensey and C. Derick Miller.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the American Justice Podcast.
We talk shit.
And we talk crime, but we never talk shitty crime. Hey, C. Derick, how's it going this week?
Up, man? Dude, I'm so busy. I'm so busy.
I know that. Tell everybody what's going on.
I have been invited to work a couple of upcoming book festivals. And, that's cool. That's something I really haven't done since the beginning of the pandemic. I know I passed on a lot of those. I remember the beginning of 2022 and just going, this is going to be the best year ever.
I think we all thought that.
New wife, new life, new truck. I think I was sitting at the NHL Winter Classic. Great game. Stars were kicking butt, taking names. I'm like, this is going to be the best year ever. And I had boxes full of books and tables and banners and everything. And I was going to hit up all these book conferences and book fairs. And I was going to be just in people's faces.
You talking about 2020?
Yes, in 2020.
I thought you said 2022. My bad.
Oh no, in 2020.
In 2020. Okay. I was listening. I was like,
I was gonna do all these things, and I was so ready to just make it all happen and be out there, be a part of the community, and just make it to where there was no one that was going to be able to ignore me as an artist.
Right.
And then
you're gonna make a splash.
Then it happened. And those books they slowly got sold. Mm-hmm. Just a couple on the website here, a couple in a bookstore there.
Right.
And now that it appears as though we are turning a bit of a corner in the pandemic, I've got the the Ghoulish Book Festival coming up in San Antonio. I've got another couple more coming up, and I got another book coming out. I have a short story in it, and I've submitted some more short stories to some other anthologies. I think I've reached that point in my writing career where I just really don't have the want to spend the time to write an entire novel. I have no problem busting out a short story in a couple of days and submitting it to anthologies and collections.
Right.
I don't know if I have the patience or the time right now to indulge in another novel. I have several that I've started, and they're all just sitting there unfulfilled. And we call that folder the ex-wife folder. It's just unfulfilled projects is what they were.
Right. It's kind of like the playwright that always has like a half-written movie script.
Right.
It's like,
yeah, it's the same thing. And I don't know how much more I've got in me. But the anthologies are fine. There's another one of those that'll be coming out in the next couple of months. And this one's called A Book Without a Name.
A Book Without a Name.
This publisher just gave up before they even started.
I was going to say, what's the name?
It's called A Book Without a Name.
Okay, well,
Western horror though.
Nice.
Similar to Starving Zoe, just less crazy.
Yeah, you know what? And we refer to you being a writer in several episodes because you are the head writer. But let's talk about some of the stuff that you have done, just to kind of give everybody a taste of what you have written and published. And probably the most recent, I guess, full book was Starving Zoe.
Yes,
right?
Novella with the Splatter Western series from Death's Head Press. It would be Starving Zoe. That's, I guess, Splatter Western number 5. Really crazy novella written in a kind of first person kind of rambly narration style, kind of like J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine Holden Caulfield. If Holden Caulfield lived in 1865,
Right.
He was a washed up Confederate soldier / racist / misogynist / baby killer.
Everything.
Yes.
Everything that you don't want to be.
Everything you don't want to be. Well, I can't imagine anybody would want to be Holden Caulfield either. But
Right.
a lot of people are, and they just don't know it.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was given some pretty mixed reviews because it is pretty.
Right.
We'll say it's very. What's the word for it? Not.
It was
not gory. I mean, it's gory, but it's a splatter western. But it's real, like authentic, or
yes,
not,
it's very is period accurate.
Yeah,
is what I like to call
the stuff
that
actually happened back then.
And there's a lot of people that are like, oh, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. Well, so were we as a society back then in 1865. Exactly. It's period accurate. It's how people acted. It's how men acted. It's how he does the things that we did back then. Was it the right thing to do? No. And over time, we've learned that it wasn't the right thing to do, but it's what we did as a society back then. And no matter how many statues you remove, it can't, take away what we did as a society.
Yeah, this guy was
years ago.
This guy was a pretty bad guy.
Yeah, really, really bad guy. I mean, there are no heroes in this story. It is nothing but villains.
Right.
And, I mean.
All right. Well, just go ahead and give us an overall synopsis of the book.
Well, I'll do better than that. I can give you an exact synopsis of this book because, after all, Google is free and it's in our pockets.
It is.
To most, 1865 was an eye-opening year. The American Civil War was officially over, and the soldiers, fortunate enough to survive the bloody conflict, returned home to collect the pieces of their former lives. To young Arizonan Robert Jack, the fateful desert homecoming marked the end to all he once knew. Forgiveness is overrated. Death is final. Revenge, however, dances between the fine lines of mortality and eternity. Love always finds a way. And yes, this is a love story. This is very much a love story. There are some people who run horror websites and stuff that have called this the most effed up love story they've ever read. And I take pride in earning that title here.
Disturbing.
Yes, it's very, very.
It's not for the weak of heart.
It is not for the weak of anything. It is, like I said, it was something I'd been reading at the time that I decided to sit down and write this book. I'd been reading Hunter S. Thompson. I just finished rereading Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for the first time in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I had just finished reading Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger for the very first time. And I had just finished being introduced to the great splatterpunk Southern Gothic author Edward Lee.
Mm-hmm.
I read his book Header, which I will not explain the definition of the word header on this show. There was a film made about his book Header, and it was very short-lived film, very hard to find. My wife managed to get me not only a copy of it on DVD for my birthday, she managed to ship it to the great Edward Lee himself, who signed it several times. And I have yet to crack it open and watch it. It sits on my shelf untouched. I refuse to touch it. It just means way too much to me. So,
awesome.
Yeah. So,
right.
But yes, Google is free. It's in your pocket. Feel free to look up Header and see for yourself
right.
what it means.
All right. And Starving Zoe is available on Amazon.
Starving Zoe is available on Amazon. Is also available on Godless, which is a horror ebook format. Godless carries a lot of horror books that have been banned from Amazon that Amazon will not publish or distribute. So Godless has taken up that mantle. You're going to get some really disgusting stuff there. You can also, if you happen to live in the Dallas area, you go to Poets Oak Cliff on Bishop. They proudly carry physical copies.
Awesome.
And they're already pre-signed.
Well, we will leave some links in the show notes for everybody that's interested, but let's get to some true crime. All right, folks, this week's case had me saying, wait, what? As I struggled to keep two of the names straight during my initial research. You know how when you're reading a novel and you don't quite have the characters down and you have to go back and reread to remember who is who? That was me when I first started investigating the events of this story in what at first didn't seem like a wrongful conviction case at all, but later, sadly, and bizarrely at the same time, definitely was. Truly a twisted tale meant for the silver screen. This case starts with a crime, as they all do, a horrendous crime, unthinkable yet again. This time, we even get to know who did it right from the start. What could go wrong? Let's begin with 14-year-old Camille Arfmann. Camille lived with her older sister Heidi, Heidi's 23-year-old husband Floyd Bledsoe, and their two young sons in Okaloosa, Kansas.
Guilty.
Sorry.
Sorry.
On Friday, November 5th, 1999, a slight breeze and mild temperatures ushered Camille off of her school bus at 4:20 p.m. She walked inside her trailer home and was not seen alive again. Just 40 minutes later, Camille's friend stopped by and saw that her coat and backpack were in the trailer, but Camille was not. When she didn't show up at a church social that night, her family started searching for her and eventually called the police to report her missing. Flyers were circulated and her disappearance was discussed at the Countryside Baptist Church on the following day, November 6th. That night, Pastor James Bollinger received a phone message from Tom Bledsoe. Now, here's where I started to have to reread my research because I was expecting to hear Floyd Bledsoe as I got deeper into the events, and when I heard Tom's name, I thought I had misunderstood who this was about, other than Camille, obviously. So I'm not going to take a moment to emphasize the two names for you. This wrongful conviction case is about Floyd Bledsoe, not Tom Bledsoe. Floyd. Camille lived with her sister and Floyd. Tom is Floyd's brother. His brother. Yes, I'm obviously doing some foreshadowing here. Work with me. So Tom, not Floyd, left a message for the pastor, which was in part, quote, "I know where Camille is. When you get this message, I turned myself into the police department. You don't know the grief that I went through as I sat there thinking, I wish I never did it. I will pay for the rest of my life for what I've done." End quote. Chilling, right? Maybe now you're thinking that this is a slam dunk case complete with a refreshingly uncoerced confession. But Hollywood wouldn't buy a story that was that straightforward.
Of course they wouldn't.
Tom then turned to his best chance at a support system, his parents. I can at least understand how desperate he must have been feeling, but don't confuse understanding with compassion. I'm nowhere near the level of empathy right now. Tom's father told him to wait for him to meet him. For a second time, Tom called Pastor Bollinger and left another message saying, "All I can ask is forgiveness for what I have done. I will pay for the rest of my life for what I have done." End quote. This really sounds like an honest, guilt-ridden confession to me. What do you think? Sometimes we can and should take things at face value and believe what our senses are telling us. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. In the next logical step, Tom turned himself into the police. You might now be wondering how on earth a confession from one brother becomes a conviction for another. I had the name straight in my mind at this point during my research, but I still didn't understand how this case ended up being about Floyd. So not only had Tom confessed by voicemail and turned himself into the police, but through his attorney, he turned over a murder weapon, a 9mm handgun that he had purchased 2 weeks prior to Camille's death. Ballistics testing confirmed that Tom's gun did kill Camille. Later, the attorney also turned in the bullets Tom had purchased. Tom directly told the police, "I did it. I killed her." As open and shut cases go, I think this one is pretty solid. The cops didn't even have to get witnesses to lie. Grill Tom for hours, threaten him physically, coerce a confession, and then promise he could go home if he signed their version of what had transpired.
They must have been so damn disappointed.
I know.
Especially in Kansas.
Nor did the police have to investigate anything. Everything was handed to them. The legwork was done. The meal was pre-chewed and pre-digested.
Your Stories on Video is the perfect service to preserve all of your memories for generations to come. If you've ever thought to yourself that it's time to get all of those precious memories down on video, now is the time. Here's a quick sample of one of our videos.
My name is Daryl Kaiser, and I was born in 1925 in Canby, Minnesota. The happiest day of my life. It has to be when I got married. Yeah, that would have to be my happiest day. I sat down in a chair that was several chairs, and there was women on the opposite side. And ordered me a drink, and I looked down that way, and Betty was looking at me. So I winked at her. And the next thing I know, then I went and asked her for a dance, and we danced and several times, and then I asked to take her home. I can't say that I ever gets out of my mind at all.
Daryl hired Your Stories on Video because he wants his grandkids and their grandkids to hear from his own mouth and his own likeness what his life was like. He also shared the family ancestry as only he could. Going back and researching archives are one thing, but watching the person that lived it is so much better. The process to get a video is very simple. Just go to www.yourstoriesonvideo.com and request a consultation. Then one of our experienced story consultants will work with you from the beginning to the end to make sure your video is exactly what you want it to be. Many kinds of individuals and families utilize our service, from the older generation wanting to pass down their wisdom to those that have an unfortunate medical diagnosis. Contact Your Stories on Video today at yourstoriesonvideo.com. Mention the American Justice Podcast and receive a 25% discount.
So let's review what we know at this point. Tom confessed twice in voicemails. He turned himself in. He had the gun and the bullets. He told the police he did it. Can you think of anything else that he could do to get the finger pointed at him? How about telling the police where Camille's body was? Yep. He told them where to find her, burned in a trash dump on the farm where Tom lived with his parents. Even the location of the body screams, Tom is guilty. She had been shot 4 times and her top and bra were pushed under her arms. Evidence found in the area showed that she had been dragged to the burial site. Case closed. At least there could be justice for Camille and her family. Even as I'm about to tell you what happened next, it makes no sense to me. Let's see what you think on the other side.
Yes, by all means. I would love to know what I think because I have no idea what in the hell is going on right now.
I know, this is crazy. After he went to jail, Tom changed his story. From the cases I've researched so far, I'm just flabbergasted that this tactic would even have a scintilla of a chance of succeeding. But succeed, it did. In Tom's new version of the events, he said that Floyd actually killed Camille and that he admitted to it during a conversation that they had on Saturday. According to Tom, they were talking on the side of the road where Floyd was passing out missing person flyers. He told police that Floyd described the killing and told Tom where to find the body. He claimed that Floyd coerced him into taking the blame by threatening to expose Tom for trying to have sex with a dog and masturbating while watching pornography.
Now we're getting somewhere, baby.
Now we're getting to the Hollywood story.
Oh,
here.
yes, Scott, we are not in Kansas anymore.
So I have a feeling a lot of that goes on in Kansas. All right.
Well, what you going to do this weekend? I don't know. I think I'll jack off on a dog.
So what was the next best move for the police? They released Tom and charged Floyd with the first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated indecent liberties with a child.
Never mind the dog.
Never mind. Yeah, poor dog. What's your verdict? Does any of this make logical sense to you? There has to be some explanation we aren't privy to. I feel like the dots need to be connected so I know how things got from point A to point what in the damn hell? I don't want to spoil things for you, but the actual explanation will still leave you scratching your head.
Forget the explanation, man. I'm still trying to get past the dog part.
I know. Like, who does that? Like, I'm gonna threaten to expose you for masturbating to. I mean,
what if it wasn't his fault? What if the dog just happened to like get in the way? Not saying that happens or anything.
Oh man,
I'm not. I have cats.
Right. Well, okay. So, anyways. In April of 2000, wearing a bulletproof vest due to death threats from Camille's family, I guess they already reached their verdict, Floyd went to trial in Jefferson County District Court. Let's see how the so-called evidence against him stacks up. The prosecution said that Floyd was divorcing his wife and thought that Camille was attractive. Tom testified, oh, the irony, about Floyd's confession. He claimed that he drove up to Floyd's car. They were facing in opposite directions with their windows rolled down, both motors running. Tom told the jury that Floyd put his head in his arms and confessed. Now, do you, like me, think now would be a good time for Floyd's defense attorney to speak up? Maybe the jury would have liked to have known that Tom had a severe hearing problem that prevented him from hearing normal conversation from more than a few feet away. And he had to see a person's face so that he could read their lips. Seems like a pertinent information, but defense attorneys failed to confront Tom about his hearing.
Because he or she, like me, was probably just sitting there at the table with their head in their hands going, why the dog?
Right. Poor dog. All right, so Tom's father, Floyd Sr., testified at the trial. He provided an alibi for Tom as a rebuttal to the defense team's attempt to portray Tom as the killer. He said something about being at an auction with Tom until 1 p.m. the day of the murder and that Tom was asleep at 10 p.m. when Floyd Sr. and his wife returned home. I've read that information a dozen times, and I still see a problem with the alibi as it pertains to the timeline. Camille was last seen at 4:20 p.m. Tom was back from an auction at 1 and was asleep by 10. How is that an alibi? Tom was literally unaccounted for between 1 p.m. and 10 p.m. If his dad wasn't home, how does he know what time Tom fell asleep?
And then they called the dog to the stand.
Roof, roof. Floyd Sr. further testified that a security alarm would have gone off if anyone had left the house during the night, and no such alarm ever sounded. First of all, Camille may have already been dead by the time that Tom went to sleep. I find it unlikely that he simply had her stashed somewhere until he could kill her. My personal guess is that this was a spur-of-the-moment crime that got out of control super fast. Second of all, he could have been pretending to be asleep. None of us have ever done that before, right?
Perhaps he was dog tired.
Right. Third of all, wouldn't an adult member of a household like Tom know the code to disable the security alarm? These are some of the thoughts that should have been going through any juror's mind as they tried to piece together what may or may not have happened. Sometimes, even most of the time during a criminal trial, we have to make our best logical guess and try to fill in the blanks because we don't often get all of the facts. That's why the whole beyond a reasonable doubt is imperative and is so important. I just see a lot of shadows of a doubt already. Don't you?
Well, this is okay. First of all, this is crazy. First through 10th of all, this is like really freaking crazy. I mean, I don't think we've ever done a case that occurred in Kansas,
Right.
that I've been able to give my opinion on the state of Kansas. But just know that it's not very favorable. Number two, you've got a guy who confessed. He confessed over and over again and gladly went to jail and then just goes, you know what? Now that I think about it, I don't think it was me. It might have been my brother. And they
Right.
believed it.
Right.
And then they acted on it. It's one thing to believe it, but to also act on it. Like there had to be many different people involved here of the same state of mind in order to put Floyd in jail instead of Tom.
Right. And I was thinking to myself when doing this that, this would be like the perfect crime. Like you have two brothers that are like, well, I didn't do it. He did it and he told me about it. And the other one's like, well, I didn't do it. He did it and he told me about it. Like, unless you have any physical evidence that ties either one of them to the crime, there's no way to know which one's telling the
There's
truth.
only one way to solve this, man. You put them both in the same cell. You lock them both up. You arrest them both. And then you put the dog in the cell.
Oh, God, no,
And
don't do
whichever
that.
one the dog goes to.
Or
is the
whichever one the dog cowers from.
Well, the dog could be a freak. You don't know that, Scott.
Now let's get down to the forensics of it all. There was no forensic evidence that linked Floyd to the crime. Talk about making a long story short, right? The prosecution told the jury that the rape kit was negative, meaning no DNA was found. What would that piece of information tell you if you were on the jury? It seems obvious to me, but clearly it didn't influence the jury enough to think this might be the shadow of a doubt that we're looking for.
I know everyone's probably tired of hearing about this by now, but did they bother testing the dog for DNA evidence? I still can't get over the jerking off on the dog thing.
That's, crazy. Well,
Like I said, accidentally is fine. On purpose, no.
talk about the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the jury...
Yeah.
Ruh-roh, Raggy. Well, maybe the jury was still deciding, so why not hinge this case on statements made by a 2-year-old? That would seem on par with the expert handling the facts thus far. Apparently, Floyd's son, Cody, who did not testify, I think I would have been less surprised if he had testified, made statements that impacted both Tom and Floyd.
He was a 2-year-old?
He was a 2-year-old.
You put...
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Cody, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Pain.
Who's God? What's God? What's the truth? I don't know.
SpongeBob. SpongeBob. He's obviously guilty, Your Honor.
Right. All right. Well, yeah, obviously that sounds helpful, right? Statements from a 2-year-old. The defense attorney questioned the pastor's wife about what she had heard Cody say. So now we're not even talking about directly from the 2-year-old. Now we're talking about hearsay. She testified that she heard him telling a story about Tom shooting Camille. She heard Cody say, Tom shot Camille. Boom, 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 boom. And dumped her in the water. Tom put Cody's blanket around Camille and also put Camille's blanket around her. Tom closed Camille's eyes and he kissed her cheeks. Floyd's wife, Heidi, confirmed that she and the pastor's wife asked Cody what happened to Camille, and Cody told her that Tom shot her, wrapped her in a blanket, and put her in the dump. While this testimony seems to exonerate Floyd and condemn Tom, did anyone stop to ask why Cody knew all of these details? Was he a witness? Had Tom confessed to him because leaving voicemails for the pastor and literally confessing to the police weren't enough?
Or the fact that a law enforcement agency, even in the state of Kansas, is going to ask anything or believe anything a 2-year-old says.
Right. It's horrifying to think Cody may have witnessed anything, and reprehensible if Tom unburdened himself to a 2-year-old. But even if the jury was now starting to have doubts based on the secondhand testimony of a child, the door was opened for the prosecution to ask further questions about Cody's comments.
Sir, could you tell us what type of dipping sauce you like with your chicky nuggies?
I imagine the question went something like this. What did Cody say a few days after Floyd's arrest? And the conflicting answer was, Cody said, Daddy killed Camille. I didn't believe Tom when he changed his story. I'm not sure I'm going to rely on the revisionist remarks of a toddler.
That's right, because we all know the answer is barbecue sauce.
Always.
Always.
If I were on the jury, I might dismiss the entire portion of the testimony as a draw, while leaning towards believing Cody's first account. I sure hope Cody sees a psychologist at some point in his life. I'm actually pretty worried about
that
him.
Kid is way too privy to what's going on in the trailer, man.
Right.
I mean, then again, they're not that big.
Floyd did not testify as his constitutional right, but witnesses who were able to account for Floyd's whereabouts on the day Camille disappeared did testify. He was working on a dairy farm all day, arriving home at around midnight. From that time on, he immediately started searching for Camille. He had an alibi from the morning of November 5th through November 6th, which you may notice includes the last time that Camille was seen alive when she got off the school bus. I'm struggling to understand what the jury might have missed or how they came to their verdict on April 28, 2000. There was no DNA evidence and no forensics linking Floyd to Camille's death. Floyd had an alibi. His brother confessed, led police to the body, and produced the murder weapon and bullets. Cody somehow knew details about what had happened and named Tom as the guilty party. Regardless, the jury found Floyd guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated indecent liberties with a child. He was sentenced to life plus 16 years.
Oh my goodness. Here we go again with the life plus thing. But
well, it just has to do with eligibility for parole. Because if you get a life sentence, you're usually eligible for parole in 25 years. But
sounds like something someone in our government would come up with
right.
At some point.
We're gonna keep you incarcerated till the end of your life and then some.
But okay, incarcerating someone on the word of a 2-year-old, I rank that right up there with incarcerating someone because you may have heard his voice on a telephone.
Right.
Or incarcerating someone because someone said they saw a comment on their MySpace page that is no longer there.
Right.
Like,
well, but also remember the 2-year-old said that he saw someone else do it. Or not saw him, but that Tom was guilty and Floyd was the one that was convicted.
I think the dog did it. I'm leaning more toward the dog.
That was an evil dog.
Well, he had a motive.
Right?
He got tired of the men in the house jerking off on him. He's like, I'll get them.
Anyway. In 2004, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld his convictions and sentencing. Afterwards, a hearing was held on a motion for a new trial. The premise was that Floyd's defense was inadequate. You think? The motion was denied. In 2007, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld that decision, but did find that the prosecution had improperly discussed facts that were not in evidence. The prosecution was also found to have misstated evidence and testimony in its closing arguments. An interesting statement made by the court was as follows, quote, lacking any strategic explanation in the record for the defense attorney's failure to object, and given the repeated nature of the prosecutor's behavior, we agree that Floyd's attorney was ineffective by failing to object to these statements. Floyd's attorney's performance fell below the constitutional threshold of objective reasonableness, end quote. Shockingly, the court determined that these errors were not enough to merit vacating the convictions.
And they sent it to the judge on a piece of paper, and in purple crayon it read,
What the court said next would make me want to shout at the TV screen if I were watching an episode of Law & Order or the news. See if you can find the aggravating parts of this decision. Quote, on the record before us, this was a difficult case. Two brothers accused each other of vile crimes. There was ample evidence to support each accusation. The jury, after weighing all of its substance and the credibility of many witnesses, was persuaded that the state prosecuted the right brother. Although in the hands of another defense lawyer, the case may have been tried to another conclusion. May is not good enough, end quote. You know, this is one of those things that reminds me of the Brandon Woodruff case or really any appeal. All appeals the judges are considering the appeal, they always have to consider the evidence that is most favorable to the jury's verdict. So if the jury convicts someone, then the appeal has to look at the evidence in the light of the fact that the person is guilty. And it just doesn't make any sense to me when you're appealing something. It seems like you would just look at the evidence in light of what's most fair to, the truth. It just doesn't make sense to me. Why are we looking at evidence that's in favor of the conviction if we're sitting here disputing the conviction? It's never made sense to me.
No, this whole thing, it comes from 1999. This isn't some kind of case that happened in the 1950s or the 1960s with like Kansas. I mean, this isn't something that your grandfather's telling you about that he remember reading in the newspaper a long time ago. This is something that happened in 1999.
Right.
2000 party over. Oops, out of time. This was not that long ago.
That's right.
And yet here we are, you two brothers. Well, one confesses, hands over all the evidence, goes to jail, and he just changes his mind. Like, nah, it wasn't me, it's my brother. And they go for it.
Right.
This is insane. This may be one of the most insane cases we have ever covered on this podcast.
Yeah.
This is the blue ribbon winner right here.
Right.
Best in show. You like my dog references?
I do.
I went through that whole bit right there just to get
just to say best in show. Nice.
No, I didn't. But it was just coincidence. But seriously, I can't believe in the year 1999 something like this could have happened.
Right. Oh, I agree. And what makes it so bad is, you can't point to something like, official misconduct or any of this stuff. It's like, it's literally just two people that are blaming each other with no forensic or DNA evidence. How do you convict anything? How do you get beyond a reasonable doubt?
You don't.
Yeah.
Like this, man, this is insane. This has me scratching my head.
Yeah.
Like, you should check me for fleas.
Right. Well, God. While I understand the jury's verdict should be accepted as final, appeals notwithstanding, and what madness it would be to question what might have been given the number of cases there are each year and the number of convicted inmates who would likely play the what-if game if they could, there's a whole lot to unpack in this court decision. First, the court claimed that they had a difficult case before them. Difficult how? It's definitely a difficult crime to hear about, but is it a difficult case to adjudicate? They said that, quote, two brothers accused each other of vile crimes, end quote. But that shouldn't have made things difficult. The guy who confessed is the clear front runner here. I mean, the phrase, he who smelt it dealt it, isn't just a playground rhyme. Tom confessed, knew where the body was, owned the murder weapon. Tom did it. Maybe the court could add the smelt it dealt it phrase to their legal briefs so that they have something useful to refer to in the future. In the United States versus smelt it dealt it, no. If it would make the court feel more comfortable, we could update the saying to the more applicable, he who said the rhyme did the crime. Just trying to make this straightforward for the court here. The court went on to explain that there was ample evidence to support each accusation. Was there, though? Are we just banking on the conflicting hearsay of a 2-year-old now, or is it the compelling accusation of someone who confessed to the crime out of complete and utter guilt? I mean, sure, Floyd accused Tom, and Tom changed his story and threw him under the bus, but that was more because Tom did it and doesn't actually constitute proof of anything. And what evidence was there against Floyd? Nothing forensic, that's for sure. And witnesses? Does the court mean the folks who worked with Floyd all day up until midnight when he began searching for Camille? Or do they mean the unbiased father who probably lied for one son over the other and to take the fall?
Wait, you said Floyd worked for a dairy, right?
Yes, he worked at a dairy farm.
Utter guilt. You're welcome.
In 2008, Floyd filed a federal petition for a writ of habeas corpus, which applies to all cases of illegal confinement or detention. This is a procedure whereby the federal court can review the legality of a person's incarceration. In doing my research, I discovered that 3.2% of those petitions are granted, and only 1.8% result in any type of release for the petitioner. Not great odds, but what would anyone in Floyd's place have to lose? Floyd's petition was granted by a U.S. District Court judge on the grounds that his lawyer had provided a, quote, constitutionally inadequate defense, end quote. Of course, the prosecution decided to appeal the decision, but in the meantime, Floyd was released on bond. Around a year later, the 10th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals reversed the decision made by the lower court, reinstated Floyd's conviction and sentencing, and sent him back to prison. Can you imagine having to go back to prison?
Nah, baby, they'd have to find me first.
Right. What a horrifying ordeal that must have been. It's bad enough that he had the specter of returning to prison hanging over his head for almost a year, but then to actually have to return to that living hell. Ugh.
I'd have been a Canadian.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Now here's where the modern hero of wrongful conviction cases, DNA, joins the story. The Paul E. Wilson Project for Innocence and Post-Conviction Remedies at Kansas University School of Law decided to represent Floyd. A law student there with a degree in forensics was investigating the use of touch DNA, also known as trace DNA. Touch DNA is a method of analyzing very small samples left at a crime scene, like the skin cells left on an object after it has been touched or casually handled. In 2012, the Project for Innocence requested permission to perform DNA testing. Lacking resources, they sought assistance from the Midwest Innocence Project, and in 2014, DNA testing was done on the vaginal swab, the rape kit, and Camille's clothing. Can you guess what our hero revealed? The test results found Tom's DNA on the vaginal swab. Tom's, not Floyd's. Tom's.
who'd have thunk?
This test actually excluded Floyd. I know this is a shocking revelation. Such a twist. Such a surprise ending. Well,
M. Night Shyamalan caliber.
Well, I gave you a pretty twisty surprise beginning, so now I'm probably all out of twists and surprises. Oh, wait. One more thing. DNA was also found on the victim's socks. You're guessing Tom's DNA, right? Surprise! It was Tom's father's DNA, which suggests he may have helped drag Camille's body to the burial site, but that was just a theory at the time. I'm sure there might be another explanation. Floyd's lawyers also uncovered an order signed by the prosecutor, the county sheriff, and a representative of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation agreeing that there would not be any DNA testing conducted on the evidence that was gathered. This is just unforgivable. What were they afraid that the DNA testing would show? It could have shown them that they had the right guy. It could have bolstered their case. Were they worried that it would show that they didn't have the right guy? Isn't it their job to convict the right guy? You know, maybe prosecutors need to remember that it's not them or even the defense attorneys who win or lose in any given case. It's justice that wins or loses. And the only time that we can truly say justice has won is when both sides of any case are acting in good faith to find the truth. Everyone should fight tooth and nail to see that justice is done. Don't attorneys take an oath to that effect? I think at some point they have to swear to act with integrity and civility or something like that. Maybe we need to be more specific with them. But again, I digress. In October 2015, a motion was filed to vacate Floyd's convictions and sentences based on the DNA results. And just when you thought that there might be no more surprises in this episode, the American Justice Podcast, we have yet another tragic twist. On November 9th, 2015, Tom Bledsoe committed suicide in Bonner Springs, Kansas. He was found in a car parking lot. He had written several suicide notes admitting that he raped and killed Camille. He wrote one note to his parents saying, quote, "Floyd is innocent. Please tell Floyd I am sorry." In another note, he said, "I raped and murdered a 14-year-old girl. I sent an innocent man to prison. The Jefferson County Police and County Attorney, Jim Vanderbilt, made me do it. I was told by Vanderbilt to keep my mouth shut. Now I am going to set things right." End quote. He also drew a map showing where a shell casing could be found near the spot where he buried Camille, which detectives discovered by using a metal detector. Tom further described how he had raped Camille in his parents' bed, which was how his father's DNA ended up on her clothing. I told you there could be another explanation. He said when he found out that she was 14, he freaked out. He drove her to a ditch. So raping a girl is not a problem.
Yes.
But finding out that she's underage, oh my God.
You're underage. Yeah. And like, okay, these guys were brothers and this chick was living with Floyd. You mean to tell me you didn't already know the age of that girl? Like it hadn't came up in casual conversation from time to time. You didn't go to birthday parties. You didn't do anything. You had no idea until you were in the middle of raping her that she was underage. Give me a fucking break.
Right. He drove her out to a ditch near his parents' home and begged her not to tell. He panicked, grabbed his gun, and pushed her to the ground. He tried to threaten her, and the gun accidentally went off behind her head. He didn't mean to kill her. Devil's advocate here, asking why he shot her 3 more times then?
And, according to Tom, she was 98 in dog years.
That's right. I called this twist tragic because it involved suicide, and I take the loss of life seriously. But the one thing I do appreciate is that Tom left everyone with closure, sharing details of what had happened that only he would know. He didn't take his secrets to the grave. He didn't die without a note, leaving us to guess that he probably killed himself because he felt guilty for what he had done. He didn't leave us with an unsolved mystery. And his notes, along with the exculpatory DNA evidence, freed an innocent man. In most cases, only the murderer and the victim know the whole truth. The murderer is usually reluctant to be forthcoming, and the victim can't speak for his or herself. The most important thing is that Camille's family didn't have to suffer thinking the man who murdered Camille was set free. They got the truth and a measure of closure when Tom chose to end his life. Most important of all, Camille can rest in peace, and her murderer has met his fate.
But then there's another twist.
Uh-oh.
Yes, the state of Kansas came back, and even though Floyd was incarcerated at the time, Tom did not commit suicide.
Oh, no.
He was murdered by Floyd.
Right. That's crazy.
They only found paw prints at the scene.
Oh, God. On December 8th, 2015, Judge Gary Knapziger vacated Floyd's convictions. The prosecution dismissed the charges, and Floyd was blessedly released. The following May, Floyd filed a federal civil rights lawsuit claiming he was framed by prosecutors, the police, and his brother's attorney. 3 years later, the state of Kansas awarded Floyd $1.03 million in compensation.
And in Kansas dollars, that is over a gazillion.
Well, actually, it's only over $64,000 a year, folks. Floyd also received state health insurance for 2 years and a certificate of innocence in regard to his arrest and conviction. If I were in his shoes, I might get that certificate laminated and keep it in a locked fireproof box for safekeeping. Then, every so often, I would take it out and just stare at it to make sure that it was real.
Floyd Bledsoe is starting over. He's been out of prison for 3 years. He now has a beautiful family. But life after 16 years behind bars isn't easy. The state of Kansas has a new compensation bill to help those wrongfully convicted. It means money, about $1 million in Bledsoe's case, education, and health care.
It is law.
Bledsoe was there when then Governor Collier signed it into law. They shook hands inside a church. KCTV5 did a report and took these photos.
And when they passed this bill, I was like, you know what? Things are moving forward. Things are going to get better. Things are going to get easier.
So let's talk about the factors that contributed to the wrongful conviction. There was untested forensic evidence, perjury and false accusation, official misconduct, and an inadequate legal defense. That hits on 3 of the 6 common causes of wrongful convictions. The false accusation, while effective, was so transparently absurd, I'd have to throw it in juror gullibility as a bonus contributing factor. The prosecutors must have not even tried to get a false confession this time. They just settled for fabricating a false narrative and putting pressure on Tom.
That also, the one thing that they don't mention now is that Cody is 24 years old now.
Right.
That's an ass whooping, kid. I'm going to beat your ass.
Right. Well, no, remember Cody was the one that said that Tom did it. So Cody was actually right. We should have believed the 2-year-old.
Just for GP, just for general purpose, I'm whipping Cody's ass for even being at the courthouse that day. He should have been home taking care of the dog. That's all I'm saying.
Poor dog. I do love that Heroic DNA got to do another cameo in our story this week. Maybe we should make a cartoon DNA mascot for the show. Any artists out there feeling creative, if we use DNA Hero on our links, we'll give you a shout out on one of our episodes. Maybe we can even have the listeners vote for their favorite. We promise to hold a free and fair election without any voter fraud whatsoever, just like in real life.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting to read part of the complaint from Bledsoe versus Vanderbilt that was filed by Floyd after he was released from prison. I think you'll find it interesting too, because it's like getting the here's what happened at the end of a good detective novel. You remember Jefferson County's prosecutor, Jim Vanderbilt, right? This one part of the complaint described just how the conspiracy against Floyd was born. Apparently, there was a meeting among various participants, some of whom remain unnamed, but others included Jim Vanderbilt and Tom's attorney. So, this group of people colluded to formulate a plan against Floyd. Now, I'm going to read you verbatim what the complaint stated. Quote, first, Tom would recant his confession. Second, Tom would claim that he encountered plaintiff at a roadside intersection the day after Camille's disappearance and that during the encounter, plaintiff had spontaneously admitted to killing the girl. Third, and finally, Tom would maintain that plaintiff had bullied him into taking the fall for the crime by threatening to expose that Tom had watched pornographic videos, masturbated, and tried to have sexual intercourse with a dog. What a bizarre plan. I know we've already gone over this information, but to read it in the form of a planned plot, it's just pure insanity. How did you get a group of people to agree to something like that? It kind of paints Tom as a bullied victim of sorts. It seems like it wasn't his idea to recant his confession, but the $64,000 question is, why on earth would an officer of the law take a slam dunk case and twist it into a wrongful conviction on purpose and let the guilty, dangerous party go free in the process? If anyone out there knows the answer, maybe you can find someone to pay you $64,000 or at least give you a nod and a fist bump.
You know, my grandmother would have said it best. It's a phrase that she used several times as I was growing up, and it still holds true today, and especially in this case, the guilty dog barks first.
In prison, you never see the stars. You know, when's the last time you walked outside and seen the stars and really paid attention to them? You know, but you do once they're gone. You know, the worst day out here is better than anything else. I mean, freedom is one thing that you can't ever put a price tag on.
Since his release, Floyd enjoys home life in the country on a few acres with cows, dogs, and chickens. He remarried in 2016, and they are raising 3 children together. He's working for a nonprofit.
At least you didn't say puppies.
Right. He's working for a nonprofit called Freedom Challenge, which does programming to help inmates in the Hutchinson Correctional Facility. He also teaches employment skills to the inmates. He is still active with the Innocence Project, and he does speaking engagements at various colleges. There may even be a documentary about his story at some point in the future. You may be surprised to know, but Floyd is a talented artist. Although he doesn't get much time these days, he still likes to paint when he can. If you'd like to learn more about this fascinating story, you can find the book 4 Shots in Oski, Murder and Innocence in Middle America by Justin Wingirter on Amazon for $16.95 in paperback. All right, C. Derick, so any final thoughts on this episode?
First of all, I just want to put this out there to the listeners. I know that it seems like sometimes I am making very light of horrible situations, but I do understand that these cases are just the most horrific of crimes, and that's how I deal with very bad things. Is I joke, or I try to make other people laugh.
Right.
And I think if I had to pay $1 for every dog joke I made in this episode, Scott, you would
leave it
have
at the
enough
door.
for a really nice dinner. But I just it's what I do. It's also something that I do, and nobody's complained about this, not yet anyway. I'm sure they will. But I just wanted to go ahead and preemptively put this out there. It's also something that I do in my horror writing as well, as I interject a lot of humor into it, because that's how I, as a person, deal with bad things in my life. I have always tried to find the funny in the absolute nasty.
Well, and I think that, especially me being an EMT, we do the same thing because we see death and destruction and all this stuff every day. So people in the medical profession seem to have a very warped personality, warped sense of humor. And, we'll sit there and show up on a scene of family of 4 that was decapitated, and everybody's sitting there, cracking jokes. It's not that we don't care. It's not that we're not professional. When it comes down to it, we do what we need to do, and we do it professionally. But, when you're kind of letting off steam about this horrible thing that just happened, it helps you deal with it mentally. And I don't think anybody wants to tune into a podcast where all we do is just sit here and read about, death and destruction, and we're serious. And it's just something that I think we need to highlight these cases till we bring them to the forefront of people's psyche. But I also think we need to do it in an entertaining way. So,
no, absolutely. I mean, and not all the jokes are going to hit either. Sometimes they're going to be horrible. Sometimes they're going to be quotation fingers, dad jokes.
Right.
Sometimes I'm going to run them into the ground, but you're going to get them.
That's right. Well, the other option there is, if you don't like the jokes, then listen to another podcast.
No, you can still listen to this podcast. You can just fast forward through my cards.
anytime we should put warnings up.
Yes.
Chad's joke coming.
C. Derick Miller speaks in exactly 3, 2, 1.
Well, we kind of did it with in Vincent Cosey's case. We're like, and now the writer's note.
Yeah.
All right. Well, see, Derick, that's going to end it for another episode of the American Justice Podcast.
Yes.
Until next time, everyone, remember to stay aware,
stay strong,
and get involved. Bye.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC of Dallas, Texas. Your hosts are Scott Pogensey and C. Derick Miller. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First and most preferred is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you'd like to blog about the show, you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and let us know what you think there. If you're a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at @AJusticePodcast. We would very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review on all the podcast streaming platforms.